what makes someone not Jewish?
Well, I feel like it's actually easier to say what makes someone Jewish, and then if none of these apply to you, then you wouldn't be Jewish.
Okay,
so
fine.
If you have a Jewish parent, if you became Jewish at some point through a process of conversion, you are Jewish. If neither of those categories apply to you, then I would not consider you to be a Jewish person.
Okay, so what kind of thing is that then? Because I think that a lot of non-Jewish people, but also maybe like a healthy proportion of Jewish people in like Western secular diverse societies or even just communities, put Jewishness in the religion category.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that category is even native to being Jewish.
Well, in every generation of Americans, less and less Jews identify as religiously Jewish and just identify as Jewish. If you look at like a bar and the left side is like on the Pew Report, you know, the left side is I'm religiously Jewish. I'm just Jewish. The line keeps moving to the left in every generation. Like in our generation, millennials, it was like half and half. Now it's way less than that. So for Jews themselves, there's both. There's Jews that see Jewish identity as a religious thing. So if they grew up, you know, observing Jewish holidays and keeping Shabbat or having some sort of Jewish connection, whether it's just one Passover Seder a year, then to them that's Jewishness. But there's a whole other demographic of Jews that sees it more as just an identity thing. Like they're Jewish because their parents were Jewish. I've seen people identify as Jewish because they have some Jewish ancestry. And so I guess the question is, who are you asking?
Can you think of any more categories in which people, like, let's go over it again. Like there's religious Jewish identity. There's like family Jewish identity. There's more distant ancestral Jewish identity. Maybe there's community-based Jewish identity.
Right. There's community-based, like somehow you're tied into Jewish community, even if you're not Jewish, and maybe that's because you're partnered with a Jewish person or your friend group is Jewish. There's cultural Jewish identity where people feel like they just act and talk and their interests and their aesthetics like match Jewish culture, and so they feel an affinity for Jewish culture and identify with it in a way. Although my sense is they don't identify as Jewish. Maybe they'll say something like, I have a Jewish neshama, like I have a Jewish soul, you know? But that's still different to me, you know, than like saying I am a Jewish person.
I can think of one more that might be a little spicy to talk about, but
Okay.
What about, to me, it feels like a lot of Jewish identity for a lot of people is bound up in certain political identities and aspirations. I'm thinking of the word Zionism.
Okay.
And the way in which a lot of people these days equate that with Jewishness or require it for Jewishness or do the opposite.
I see. Right. I mean, I think equating them comes from the outside. Like, even if you are the most hardcore Zionist, well, I guess there might be someone who would say this, but I have never met anyone that says because you're not a Zionist, you're not a Jewish person from inside the Jewish community. Like they might say you're a heretic, but you're still Jewish. But definitely outside looking in, people equate Zionism with Judaism, and that's been the case before there was even a state of Israel. Like Jews in the diaspora for the last 2,000 years have been questioned for their allegiance to the nation that they lived in because the liturgy yearns for Jerusalem. So there's nothing new there. The difference now is that there's actually a state that Jewish organizations lobby for, you know, and actually impact the politics in America to support.
This is you referred to kind of an old, long-standing, I don't know if it's like unique to Jewish history, but like the trope of dual loyalty as like an anti-Semitic canard or attack that people have used throughout history, throughout the diaspora history, right? Like since Jews have lived in other people's countries. That sort of brings to mind just the whole concept of anti-Semitism, which I use the word online in my little internet world where I get to decide what words to use for things. I use the word Judeophobia rather than anti-Semitism.
Why is that?
Because I want something that's unambiguously specific to Jewishness, right? Instead of like all these weird things people say about who Semites are and stuff. But also, you know, I want it defined in terms of in terms of like the identity that we recognize as Jewishness, right? Whereas like anti-Semitism, I know there's this whole thing about like whether it's a linguistic definition or a cultural definition or whatever, genetic definition. But to me, that term has a sort of pre-Jewish connotation, or like refers only to specific people from specific places. It raises all those weird like race science, like Middle East things, right? Whereas like Judeophobia means fear of Jews, wherever they are, whoever they are. And I don't love the way that has dominated like the humongous eruption of like Jewishness into the public discourse these days. But like, how can you get away from the idea that there's like a definition of Jewishness that's like whoever the Judeophobes identify as Jews and hate? Like how important do you think discrimination is to an understanding of Jewishness?
Well, I was just thinking about the fact that, especially in the current climate, when people think about Jews in America, they're thinking also about whiteness.
Yeah.
Which anti-Semitism, you would think the word anti-Semitism would make you question that, because when you think of a Semite, you think of someone, you know, who originates from the Middle East.
Yes.
But to answer your question, anti-Semitism is essential to the story, and you could even argue the survival of the Jewish people until today. And I mean, I see in real time that as rates of anti-Semitism grow, actually Jewish identity and affiliation grows as well. Because, well, I think there's a lot of reasons why that is, but people are tribal by nature. And when they feel threatened, they want to, you know, go back into the confines of their tribe. So it's kind of this ironic thing. It's like, actually, the more free and safe the Jewish community is, the higher the rates of assimilation and loss of Jewish identity in generations to come. And the more anti-Semitism there is, the more pressure from the outside and alienation of Jews from the surrounding culture, the stronger their Jewish identity is, and the stronger it is passed down through generations.
Let's talk about the word assimilation, which I don't think you can get around in this society, in American Jewish society, but has obviously been a thing for 2,000 years and has looked different in different Jewish communities all over the place. What does that mean to you, and what is the process of assimilation? How does it happen? Is it bad? Is it good? What role does assimilation play in Jewishness for you?
Well, assimilation is not good for Judaism. And I, as a rabbi, Judaism is in my care. That's part of what I do. And also there's other values that I hold beyond and in addition to the survival of Judaism, like health and wellness for the people around me. And of course, there's values within Judaism that come into conflict when we're talking about assimilation, because there's a value to keep Shabbat and teach Jewish mitzvot, practices of care and following laws to the next generation. And there's also the practice to see everyone B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, to welcome in the stranger. So I don't have like assimilation is bad, assimilation is okay, assimilation is a good answer. But what it is basically is a loss of Jewish identity and affiliation through the generations. And it happens by, most glaringly by Jewish people partnering with non-Jews and not raising their kids Jewish. And through most of American Jewish history, interfaith marriages have been frowned upon. Now that's shifting in some denominations. We're seeing it kind of like move through the denomination's acceptance of intermarriage. And instead of saying, well, they intermarried, like now their kids are lost, to create new approaches and new ways of engaging folks that are intermarriages that want to raise their kids with the Jewish identity. And Judaism has to shift and change in order to support and be welcoming to those families.
So you are the founder of a community in a particular place. And one of your recruitment strategies, like one of your outreach strategies, I would rather put it that way, is to people who are not affiliated, right? Is that fair to say? Who don't currently have an affiliation with a Jewish entity of some kind here.
Yeah, and part of that is I'm not trying to compete with other synagogues that have members, like if there's people that have found a Jewish community that is meaningful for them and works for them, then like, why would I go, try to recruit those people to be in my community? So it makes sense for me to be looking like who has not found a home, who is not affiliated with a synagogue. Affiliated can also refer to an organization. Like someone could be affiliated with Jewish Life and they go to the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, or maybe they go to 18 Doors, formerly Interfaith Families, for programming, and they have a sense of affiliation with those organizations. So I definitely do target folks that are connected to a Jewish community in some way, but haven't found a spiritual home specifically. Target is not the right word.
No. Yeah, that's okay.
I do try to draw in and welcome and nourish people that are still seeking.
Yeah. What does that process here for you, for Ma'alot, have to do with assimilation in like broader American society? And particularly as it relates to that sense you have that like competing with existing communities that have spiritual homes for people is not important, like, or is not desirable even. Like, as long as somebody has a spiritual home, right? It seems like that's good. That's what you want. And what you're trying to do is provide one for people who don't. Yeah.
Yes. And also Ma'alot, the name of my organization, is definitely offering something different than what you would find in a typical synagogue, even in a progressive one. So there's a lot of people that want to do both, because most of our holidays we do outside. We go to parks, we go on hikes. Our prayer is very musical and usually has instrumentation that's lay led. So like those kind of experiences that are more nature focused or, co-created music focused, where people can come and practice playing their guitar with a band or improvise, vocally for the first time in front of people. Those are different kinds of Jewish experiences that are very traditional. Our ancestors have been playing around in improvised musical prayer since Torah times, and same with venturing out into nature to find God and spirituality and revelation. And so they're very traditional, but that's not what has evolved. Those pieces haven't been integrated into the evolution of synagogue life over the years. And so a lot of Jews today look around and they're like, oh, this is Judaism. Like, what happens when I go to synagogue on Saturday morning? Like, that's what Judaism is. But actually, that's just one way that Jews have, over the centuries, sustained Jewish community. And it's been very effective and worked really well for many, many years in the diaspora. And it is now not working as well. So one of the great gifts of being in a tradition that's so ancient is that there's just so many centuries of practice to look through and draw from when kind of quote unquote like reinventing some kind of Jewish way of being. It's really just taking something much older and bringing it back to life.
I feel like the question is still unanswered, though, for me within this conversation. What makes those gatherings Jewish gatherings to you?
I think you could argue that any gathering of Jews is a Jewish gathering.
And they're doing something Jewish.
Like, I've never gone to something where a bunch of Jews were there that didn't feel Jewish to me.
Even like a comedy show.
Even a comedy show,
Yeah,
right. It's like the jokes are, Hamish in some way.
Yeah.
So I think that's a piece of it. For Ma'alot programming, there's a different bar, though. Like, the bar is that it needs to be rooted in traditional text and teachings, practice. And because I have studied it for 5 years in rabbinical school, but also learned a lot from other places I've been and other organizations that I've been a part of, like Wilderness Torah. I know the sources that these different practices or, twists, quote unquote twists, because of course, like, we're just twisting what we've been what we've been handed today, but we're not twisting Judaism, because Judaism is actually much vaster than what just our parents practiced in the generation before, right? Judaism contains every generation since Mount Sinai. So having access to those different practices and learning about them, that's actually what I bring a value as a rabbi to this community, is I can say, like, I can authenticate, like, we're not just making this up, climbing up to the top of Arabia Mountain to watch the sunset on the old year for Rosh Hashanah may seem like a totally novel way of celebrating Judaism, but actually has a lot of ties in our stories, in our practices, in, the Chassids venturing out into the field to bring in Shabbat, to Yom Kippur being called Shabbat HaShabbatot, like the Shabbats of every Shabbat. So that means the high holidays is connected to Shabbat in the spiritual way. So like making those ties in opens up new possibilities that like weave everything together.
Thanks for being on Tiger Time, honey.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.